The night Elon Musk came back to his mother's house, he did not look like a man the world believed could buy almost anything. He stood in the doorway with an expensive coat hanging from his tired shoulders, his eyes red from another crisis, his phone still lighting up in his hand, and MAYE Musk looked at him for a long second before she said, "Take off your shoes, Elon." It was such a simple thing to say, so ordinary, so motherly. But he did not move. Outside, the world was counting his money, arguing over his companies, measuring him in stock prices, rockets, cars, headlines, and enemies. Inside that quiet house, there was only a mother looking at her son, as if she could still see the small boy who once came home with scraped knees and worn-out shoes. The man in the doorway had carried companies on his back. He had survived investors who doubted him, factories that swallowed him whole, marriages that cracked under impossible work, and public storms that left him praised one day and hated the next. But May did not ask about valuation. She did not ask about Mars. She did not ask about the crisis. She only looked down at his polished shoes and said again, softer this time, "Take them off, sweetheart." That was the thing about mothers. They remember the child before the world gives him a title. They remember the first pair of shoes, the way the heel bent, the way the leather split, the way a boy tried not to complain because money was tight and pride was already hardening around his heart. Somewhere in a closet, wrapped not like a valuable object but like a wound that never fully closed, May had kept an old pair of Elon's childhood shoes. They were small, brown, scuffed at the toes. The soles were thin in places. One lace did not match the other. They looked like something that should have been thrown away decades earlier. But May had carried them across years, across homes, across countries, across the long distance between a difficult childhood in South Africa and the strange, bright, brutal world her son had built in America. She had kept them because mothers keep proof that the boy was real before the legend began. Proof that survival once meant getting through school, getting through silence, getting through a house where love did not always feel safe, and getting through another day with feet that had outgrown what the family could easily replace. Elon looked at her, exhausted and impatient. "Mom," he said, "I don't have time for this." May did not raise her voice. She turned toward the hallway closet. He watched her go, still holding the phone that kept lighting up with problems no son should have to solve while standing in his mother's doorway. Another message, another emergency, another piece of the future demanding to be rescued immediately. But that night, May was not interested in the future. She was interested in the past. When she came back, she was holding a small cardboard box. She placed it on the table with both hands and opened the lid. There they were, the old shoes. For a few seconds, Elon did not speak. The room seemed to shrink around him. The expensive coat, the urgent phone, the impossible responsibilities, the heavy reputation, all of it seemed to fall away from his shoulders. Because those shoes did not belong to the billionaire. They belonged to the boy. The world was counting his fortune. His mother was still keeping the shoes that proved she once worried his feet would freeze. Elon did not reach for the shoes at first. He just stared at them, as if they had accused him of something. Not failure. Something older. They seemed to say, "Before you were feared, before you were rich, before people argued over every word you said, you were small enough to be protected." That may have been the hardest truth of all. He had spent much of his life trying to become impossible to hurt, He tried to become faster, smarter, tougher, more relentless. He learned to survive rejection, mockery, financial terror, betrayal, divorce, exhaustion, and the strange punishment of being watched by millions of people who did not know him but felt certain they understood him. But an old pair of children's shoes can do something a boardroom cannot do. They can make a man remember that strength began as fear. May sat across from him. She did not give a speech. She had never kept the shoes for nostalgia alone. She had kept them because she understood poverty not as a number, but as a sensation. The sensation of counting meals, counting rent, counting what could wait, counting which child needed what first.
Years earlier, before private jets and global headlines, before Tesla became a symbol and SpaceX became a dream people could watch rise into the sky, there had been ordinary pressure. There had been cramped rooms. There had been the fear of not having enough. There had been a mother trying to keep her children moving forward when the ground under them did not feel steady. And Elon, even as a child, had sensed it. He had learned that intelligence could be armor. He had learned that leaving home was not only an ambition, but an escape route. Sitting there now, he looked older than his age, with the fatigue of a man who had spent too many years choosing between disaster and disaster. Save one company, risk another. Stay at work, miss something at home. Chase the future, lose another evening with the people who needed him in the present. May pushed the box slightly closer. "Do you remember these?" she asked. He swallowed. "No," he said, too quickly.
But memory does not always return as a picture. Sometimes it returns as a feeling in the chest, a tightness, a flash of shame, the sound of footsteps in shoes that were no longer comfortable, and the stubborn decision not to complain. May looked at him with the patience of someone who had waited years to say what she was about to say. "You hated throwing things away," she said, "even when they were finished." Elon gave a faint, tired smile. "That sounds like me." "It scared me sometimes," she said. "You would keep broken toys, old books, shoes that did not fit. You acted like if you let something go, it meant it had beaten you." Suddenly the room was not only a room. It became a tunnel back to every old fear he had outrun. The fear of being trapped, the fear of being powerless, the fear that if he stopped moving, the past would catch him. People often speak about ambition as if it is made of confidence. But sometimes ambition is made of hunger. Sometimes it is made of humiliation. Sometimes it is made of a child looking down at worn shoes and quietly promising himself that one day no one would ever make him feel small again. That was the part success could not erase. Money can buy new shoes. It can buy homes, factories, influence, applause, and silence from people who once laughed. But it cannot always calm the frightened child who learned too early that safety could disappear. May had seen him chased for years. She had seen him after the death of his first child, when grief moved through the family like a locked room no one knew how to open. She had seen him after marriages strained and ended, when love became another place where the future he imagined did not match the life he could actually live. She had seen him during the near collapse of 2008, when his companies came terrifyingly close to failure, and his personal life felt just as fragile. And she had seen the way he kept going, not peacefully, almost violently, as if stopping might allow grief to catch him. Elon sat down at last. He took off his polished shoes and set them by the chair. Then, slowly, he reached into the box and lifted one of the old shoes by the heel. It looked impossibly small in his hand. "You kept these all this time?" he asked. "Of course," she said. "Why?" May looked at the shoe in his hand. "Because you were always running," she said. "And I wanted to remember when I could still catch you." That sentence struck him harder than any investor warning, any headline, any failed launch. It was not accusation. It was love. And because it was love, it hurt more. A boy had started running long before the world started chasing him. There are moments in a life that do not look important from the outside. No speech, no applause, no photograph on the front page. Just a mother, a son, a quiet table, and a pair of old shoes that somehow hold more truth than all the trophies in the world. That night, Elon did not suddenly become simple. Men like him are not solved by one conversation. Pain that old does not vanish because a mother opens a box. The next morning there would still be calls to answer, decisions to make, people to disappoint, companies to defend, and a public identity so large it barely left room for a private self. But something in the room had shifted. For a little while, he was not the man people projected their hopes and anger onto. He was not the symbol of rockets, wealth, conflict, genius, arrogance, vision, and controversy. He was a son, a tired son. A son whose mother had kept the evidence of his smallness because the world had spent so many years rewarding him for hiding it. May closed the box, but she did not put it away immediately. She left it on the table between them. Maybe because mothers understand something history often forgets. Legacy is not built only in public victories. It is also built in the private rooms where someone still loves you without being impressed by you. Elon looked toward the window. Outside, the night was still. Somewhere far away, machines were running. Engineers were working. Factories were waiting for him. The future was still impatient. But the past had finally caught up with him, and for once it had not come to punish him. It had come wearing his old shoes. He asked May if she remembered where they came from. She told him fragments, not a perfect story. Mothers remember temperatures, faces, and the look of a child pretending something does not hurt. She remembered him walking too fast, as if speed could solve discomfort. She remembered worrying. She remembered not saying too much because some children do not want pity, even from their mothers. Elon listened. That may have been the most unusual thing about the whole night. He listened. He did not interrupt with a plan. He did not turn the memory into a strategy. He just listened to a woman who had once watched him cross rooms in shoes that were giving up, and now watched the world call him one of the richest men alive. And that contrast was almost unbearable. Because wealth is loud. It announces itself. It creates headlines. It becomes a public argument. It makes strangers feel entitled to decide what kind of person you are. But a mother's memory is quiet. It remembers whether your jacket was warm enough, whether you ate, whether your shoes fit. The world was counting his fortune. His mother was still keeping the shoes that proved she once worried his feet would freeze. That is why the image matters. Not because the shoes were valuable. They were not. Not because the moment was famous. It was not. It matters because it reveals the loneliness beneath the legend. People ask what drives Elon Musk.
They point to Mars, technology, competition, ego, childhood, critics, and history itself. Maybe all of those answers contain some truth,
But maybe there is another answer, quieter and more human. Maybe part of him is still trying to outrun the feeling of having too little. Too little safety, too little softness, too little time before the world becomes dangerous again. And maybe May, by keeping those shoes, had kept the one thing he could not manufacture, acquire, or launch into orbit. She had kept a piece of him that existed before achievement became armor. Later, when people would call him unstoppable, she would remember that he once needed rest. When people would call him cold, she would remember that children who learn to survive do not always know how to ask for comfort. When people would call him rich, she would remember the shoes. That is the strange mercy of a mother. She can look at a billionaire and still see cold feet. The next time you see Elon standing beside a rocket, walking through a factory, or speaking as if the future must be dragged into existence by force, remember the old shoes. Remember the mother who kept them. Remember that before the world counted his billions, someone was counting the ways to keep him warm. And remember that even the men who try to build humanity's future may still be carrying the small, frightened child their mothers once tried to protect. If stories like this remind you of the human cost behind history's greatest minds, subscribe for more untold stories from the legends who gave everything to change the world.